Chapter 6. A Duel in the Dark. I returned to Dongfu as quickly as I could manage in the darkness and decided to take advantage of the time traveling to train. I used the asters and followed them through the trees, and it saved me quite a bit of time that I would have otherwise wasted walking. I actually got good enough that I tried to stop using the pedals, but I still found myself struggling without the scent to follow. By the time I was ready and doing it without them again, I had reached the village. The town was even more quiet than I had expected, but the puppy seemed excited to be home again. I walked through the streets and peered into windows, surprised that nearly none had light coming through. There were still almost no people walking the dusty streets, but that was to be expected in the overwhelming darkness. I checked Jiu's house and found the place deserted. With a sigh, I returned to the doctor's office where I'd seen that crying kid, but both the puppy's owner and Zhao were gone. In fact, the large infirmary was practically empty. I headed to the back and was struck with unease by the dead silence, so I cupped a hand to my mouth before calling, "Hello? Is anyone there?" An old man pulled himself from a nearby closet, causing various medical items to be scattered across the floor as he jerked free. He put a finger to his lips and shushed me before dusting himself off and coming closer. He had long white hair tied in a ponytail and a beard that was narrow and hung to his knees. He wore a simple red robe-like garb and sandals. As he approached, his eyes lingered on the puppy before he looked me over as well. "Are you all right, young man? How can I be of help?" he asked quietly. "Well, I'm looking for the owner of this puppy, and also this guy named Zhao. You would probably remember him. He has special eyes," I recalled, pointing to my own eyes. "Special eyes? Yes, I remember saving a man's eye today," he said, his weary eyes drooping slightly. "I checked his sister's house, but no one was there, so I was wondering if you might know where they went. I can't help but feel like it's my fault he got shot in the first place," I discontentedly expressed. "What kind of game are you playing at, mister? I know I'm old, but I'm not that foolish," he sneered. I was a bit taken aback, not really sure what he was on about. "I think you might be confused. I don't mean to cause any harm." "So then, are you not with those Ming Song tyrants?" he asked. I was surprised, but shook my head. "No, I'm trying to stop them from hurting the people of this town," I explained. He seemed a bit dumbfounded and scratched the back of his head. "Oh, I apologize. When I saw you without a shirt on, it reminded me of that bulky moron who barged into my office," he said, seeming annoyed by the reminder. "Well then, to answer your earlier question, most of my patients who were awake and able to walk were taken to the forest by the Ming Songs once again." I was shocked to say the least and about to act, but I gave pause when he continued. "It really makes me sick. Most of those who made it back were deathly ill when they returned," he added as he bent down to pick up one of the many items off the floor. I rushed forward and picked up all his stuff as quick as I could before piling them up on his table and sprinting out the door without a goodbye. I blasted up the hill and dashed into the forest as quick as I could, and this time I was able to find my way through the trees without much trouble, though I did trip once or twice. The wind was blowing against me as I headed through the forest, and although I couldn't feel or describe chi, I could now feel the complete path of the wind, not just its direction. By leaping through the branches as Sun did, I was able to make great time through the trees and came up to the entrance of Diu in what felt like only a few minutes. The cave was surrounded by men in blue armor, and the entrance was blocked by Mingsong Liu, the bulky brother of my real target. I was surprised I hadn't seen the Carter Lin Yu, but I figured they must have been inside Diu. There was some slight commotion nearby. One of the soldiers was poking a sick man with his spear, trying to rouse him to keep working. The soldier poked him hard just before the man violently vomited, while those chained together with him could only watch helplessly. "Hey, get up, you lazy bum. I don't care if you're sick. You're stopping the others from working. Get off your knees, you," he started to say, but he didn't get to finish his sentence before I'd had enough. I leaped down from the tree branch I'd been perched on and drop-kicked him so hard he didn't get up. I spit on the arrogant bastard before breaking the chains that held the prisoners together. "Hey, Damon, over here!" Zhao called from somewhere to my right. I heard him, but unfortunately so did Liu and the others. I immediately turned to those that I freed. I instructed them to hide yourselves, and they all moved as quick as they could to get out of the way. Liu was walking toward me with a big ugly grin on his face, so I bolted to Zhao. He had his damaged eye covered with bandages and a leather eye patch, and I immediately handed him the puppy. "Keep your head down this time," I told him seriously, and Zhao only nodded. "I was hoping I'd get to see you again, "That monkey girl won't save you this time," Liu said. "I don't need any help," I told him snidely. "Besides, I'm more interested in your sister than I'll ever be in someone as weak as you." "We'll see how tough you talk when I present your head to Lin Yu," he retorted, drawing his glaive. I put a hand on my blade and took a defensive stance. Liu ran off to my right and vanished. I wasn't sure if he was simply that fast or if the darkness was giving him the cover he needed, but I was totally on guard. He came in hot on my left and swung his glaive from my lower right. I sidestepped it and drew my blade with a violent slash, but he managed to leap right over it. He pushed himself off a tree trunk in a bounding jump before vanishing a second time. I said, "He's fast for someone so large," to myself as I lowered my blade. Then I took a deep breath to settle down. I only barely heard his running footsteps rush up from behind, so I jumped into the air to dodge his attack, landing on a high branch. "You'll have to try harder, big guy." He smiled up at me and said, "All right, just don't forget that you asked for it," before pulling out a small black orb that sparkled like starlight. It flashed brightly, so I shielded my eyes. But before I realized what was happening, my senses began to fail me one by one. I couldn't see a hand in front of my face. My ears heard only a muffled hum of nothingness. My fingers went numb, and I couldn't smell anything at all. "So this is how a guy like you beats those who outmatch you?" "Pitiful," I said, trying to mentally prepare myself for whatever Liu had planned for me in this state. I grabbed the hilt of my blade in both hands tightly, but I was taken completely off guard by a vicious blow to the back of my neck that sent me crashing down to the ground. I managed to get up quickly, but as I turned back to face Liu, he knocked my blade right out of my hands. He didn't immediately attack, so I imagine he was saying something coy, but I couldn't hear him. I decided to take advantage of the opportunity and fired a powerful bolt of lightning straight ahead. I have no idea what I hit, but it wasn't Liu, because he immediately slashed me violently across the chest with his glaive. I was knocked back into what I imagine was a group of people who broke my fall, but something sturdy smacked me right in the face. I grabbed at it and felt a fine wooden handle, and by the weight, balance, and handle shape alone, I determined it was a shovel. I pushed myself back to my feet and prepared myself for a desperate play, shovel in hand. But then, standing there on the battlefield with people behind me, blood pouring from my open wound and an imperceptible enemy before me, suddenly, I felt it. The wind, the smells, my vision, my hearing, all of them were gone. But instead of it feeling like I was missing something, it was like they'd been taken out of my way. My senses couldn't confuse me anymore. I could feel the flow of chi moving across the battlefield, pushing Liu and I against one another. It told me where he was going to go. I held up my shovel and blocked as he dashed up on my right. I couldn't hear him, but I could feel his body recoil in shock after the shovel blocked his glaive. He was caught completely off guard when I drew back and smashed him in the face with the shovel, sending him tumbling through the dirt. To my surprise, his spell wore off as he lost focus and my vision and other senses returned to me as he bounced across the ground. As my senses suddenly came back to me, I gasped from the sudden shock and needed to catch my breath. I took a moment to check my chest and found it bloody, but the wound had nearly closed up completely. Liu was completely aghast, and it seemed my blow had smashed in part of his cheek. He got up slowly with a hand held to his face. But when he returned his attention to me, I saw unyielding rage in his eyes. I smiled at him as we locked eyes, and he grunted with rage, pushing himself to his feet. We were about to engage in another round, but just as we started to move, there was a blood-curdling cry of terror from off to my right, not far into the darkness. Both our heads immediately turned toward the horrified scream, but then we looked back toward each other. I couldn't focus on him anymore, and when I looked into his eyes, I could tell Liu felt the same. We nodded to each other and immediately ran off toward the sound together. I was surprised by how effectively the bulky man managed navigating the trees in the darkness and at such high speeds. It seemed like it didn't bother him in the least. When we got close to the sound, we were both given pause by a disgusting crunching sound. I heard a man screaming as he fled from something and managed to intercept him. I grabbed him by the shirt, but as I looked at his face, I was struck. The man's face seemed as though it was literally melting away. You could see parts of his upper and lower jaw sticking out from the disgusting, oozing flesh, along with a part of his right eye socket. He was also missing large patches of his black hair, and had a tuft of it sticking out between the collar of his gray robe and the back of his neck. "Hey, what are you, what happened to you?" I asked with complete shock. "Let go! You don't understand! That thing's come to eat me!" he pleaded. Before I could question him further, Towdy's bulky form smashed through a pair of trees in a running approach. All I could think to do was dodge, so I held on to the man and got out of the way, but the beast turned back and charged me again. "What's that thing's problem?" I asked, dodging again. Liu seemed to be listening and put himself between us and the apparition. "Please, you have to help me get out of here," the man begged. I shoved him behind me. "Then get going." "I'll try to hold him off," I told him. He seemed beyond grateful and started running off through the woods. I prepared my shovel before realizing I'd left my sword behind. Towdy didn't seem interested in us at all, though, dashing past us into the forest to chase after the man. Liu and I both leaped at the monster, but our strikes passed right through it. We dashed after Towdy, but we didn't have far to go before we found the beast. Having pinned the man, we tried to protect the ground under its hoof. With a sickening crunch, Towdy literally bit through the man's head, left arm, and torso, revealing a burning gray light as his blood soaked the grass. With another snippy bite, Towdy snapped up the soul of the man and devoured it, leaving nothing but a bleeding husk underfoot. "So that's why they call you Light Eater," I remarked, preparing myself. Towdy smirked viciously at me. "Who cares? We've got to stop this thing here and now. For the good of us all," Liu shouted as he launched himself at the creature. He spun his glaive into a violent slash at Towdy, but I was surprised when the beast's eyes glowed orange and Liu stopped in midair. A faint orange glow wafted from Liu's body as he hovered above the ground, and his body twitched uncomfortably. Liu dropped his weapon and was immediately hurled backwards, crashing through trees and landing in a heap in a bush. He wasn't getting up. I gritted my teeth and electrified my shovel, but I gave pause when I saw the smirk droop from Towdy's horsey lips. Without warning, it was like Towdy shifted from a solid to a gas, its black beastly form drifting away like mist on the breeze. I realized that it was running and lunged at what remained forward, missing the shifty gas with my blow entirely as it blew away on the wind. Frustrated, I raised my fist and shook it in the direction the beast disappeared to, shouting, "Hey! You can't just run away every time I get close to you!" Of course, the beast didn't respond, so I called, "Coward!" into the trees, hoping to get it to return to the battlefield to spite me. But it didn't. So I asked myself, damn, how the hell am I going to return that thing to the underworld when I can't even lay a hand on it? Unfortunately, I wasn't struck with an answer, so I returned my attention to Liu. He was still completely unconscious, but I found myself in luck. The bulky fool had been carrying a sturdy rope on his hip, so I used it to bind his hands and feet together. Once I was sure he wouldn't be escaping, I carried his chunky ass back toward where I'd found Zhao. Zhao was chained to his sister and a couple other people, but everyone around was surprised to see me return carrying Liu. The soldiers of the Mingsong army backed down and didn't bother trying to fight. I dropped Liu to the ground and immediately broke Zhao and the others free before giving an order to the soldiers to set all the civilians free. I found myself grateful when they obeyed. Zhao immediately got my attention with a pat on my shoulder. "Hey, Damon, I'm glad you're all right. Here, I grabbed this for you," he said. I was surprised when he handed me my sword. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, "Thanks." But he waved me off, saying, "Hey, it's no problem. It's what friends are for, right?" He seemed surprised when I shook my head. "We're not friends, Zhao." He was taken aback but put a hand on my shoulder. "Oh, come on, don't be like that. You're helping us, so I want to help you, even if you don't want to call us friends," he said with a smile. I brushed his hand from my shoulder but couldn't help myself from smiling as I turned away. Something about the way he said that reminded me so much of Jacob, but I didn't have time to think about that. So instead of lingering on it, I told him, "Whatever. Listen, get these people back to town and treat it as quickly as possible. I'm going into DU to deal with Lin Yu." I was about to say more, but Zhao interrupted, saying, "I'll have Ju bring them back. I'm going with you." He was taken aback when I spun back toward him and said, "You've already been shot twice. Isn't that enough?" He shrunk from me slightly, but then regrouped his courage and stood up straight. "Yeah, but this time will be different," he replied with a pump of his fist. "You know, for a guy who claims he can see the truth, you sure seem to live in a world of delusion."